Boom! What is up, everybody? And dare I say, welcome back to the next video on our series of how to go from zero to hero in Cadence development. And in this video, we're going to be talking about contract interfaces. So, what's a contract interface? Well, a contract interface is a requirement that the contract that implements it has some stuff in it. So, in previous videos, we went over what a resource interface is. So, just to sort of refresh your memory, a resource interface is declared by saying a public resource interface, the name of it, and then the stuff inside of it. This is all stuff that resources that implement this interface have to have. So for example, if we have a test resource, right, this is a resource that implements this test interface up here, it has to have an X in it. And so if we were to get rid of this, it would complain that the resource does not conform to the interface, and that's because it doesn't have this stuff inside of it. So we're going to be following a similar concept, except for this video, we're going to be talking about contract interfaces, which are requirements on contracts to abide by some sort of interface. So to do that, we're going to say public resource, public contract, hello world. And this is going to be a normal contract, right? So inside of here, we're just going to have like an init function that doesn't do anything just yet. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go into a different file here, and we're going to define a contract interface. So similar to resource interfaces, this is public contract interface, and then we'll call it like hello world. I like to put I's in front of like my interfaces. And we're going to put some stuff in here that we're going to say, hey, every contract that implements this contract interface must have. So what we're going to do actually is we're going to go back to our regular contract, and we're going to import hello world from account 2, which is over here. And so right now, if we were to deploy this, there's nothing in it, so it doesn't matter. In here, we're not getting any errors, and that's because, even if I refresh the page, we're not going to get any errors, and that's because this hello world isn't telling us we have to do anything yet, right? So that's all cool. But let's say we want to say, okay, in our interface, we're going to say, hey, all the contracts that implement this must have a greeting. This is going to be a string. And you know what? We're also going to have a function that makes you change it. So we're going to say public function change. Can't spell. Change. Oh my God. Change greeting. And this is going to be a new. It's going to take in a new greeting, which is a string, and it's going to yeah. And so look, I actually just made a mistake, so I'm glad I did this. Remember, in interfaces, you can't actually define the functions. So this is simply just going to be saying, hey, we want a greeting that's a string, and we want a function that is, named change greeting that takes in a new greeting like this. So if we were to redeploy this contract and go back to our first contract, if we refresh this page, you're going to see that if we actually implement, I guess I forgot to do this before, but you get the point. If we actually implement hello world now, it's going to say, hey, the contract hello world does not conform to contract interface hello world. And so why is that? It's because we don't have the things that this is telling us to do here. So just for the sake of time, I'm going to copy and paste these two and bring them over here. And so now, of course, it's going to give us an error saying missing initialization of greeting. So in our init function, we have to say self.greeting equals, let's say, hello world. And it's also going to say, hey, we're missing a function implementation. So remember, in interfaces, we don't define the actual stuff. We don't say, hey, this is what greeting is initially. We don't even open up our brackets for the function. But in the actual contract, we're going to have to actually implement this function. And we can say self.greeting equals our new greeting. And so it's saying can't assign to constant member. So I messed up. This should be var. And so, of course, we have to change this to var as well, just because we want to be able to change it. So if we redeploy this again, and we go back to this contract and we refresh the page, you'll see we get no errors. So we've successfully abided by the interface, which is super cool, right? All right, so that's awesome. So we can also do some fun stuff around this, actually. And part of the reason that I made pre and post conditions the video before is because they get used heavily in contract interfaces. So remember I said that in interface, you can't actually implement the function, right? But what you can do is you can add post conditions and preconditions. And so I actually explained this in the previous video as well. But what we can say is we can say, hey, we want a post condition to be that self, so let's say self.greeting equals new greeting. And so we're going to add a thing here that says we didn't update the greeting. like just like this. And it's saying missing expected token. Oh, because this should be equals, right? Double equals. Yeah. So we're going to add a post condition here that says, hey, we want to make sure that whoever implements this contract, right, whoever implements this interface, we want to make sure that they're actually setting the new greeting to the greeting. So we can say, hey, after the function is done, we want to make sure that our greeting, which is up here, got changed to the new one. So we can redeploy this contract again, go back to our first contract, and this is going to work because of the fact that like we've done it. But what we can do is we can actually try and hack this and say, hey, we're going to make our self.greeting Jacob stinks, right? And so it's going to allow us to deploy the contract, which is cool. So it'll allow us to deploy. But what's going to happen when we actually call this function? Something's going to go wrong. So let's actually do that now. We can go into a transaction. We can import hello world from account 1. And in here, we're going to execute something. So we're going to say hello world dot change greeting to be goodbye. Let's just say goodbye. And when we run this transaction, it's going to say post condition failed. We didn't update the greeting. And that's because of the fact that we didn't implement the interface that was specified here, right? So of course we can fix this by just changing this back to new greeting. And if we redeploy this contract, then boom, we'll redeploy it. Hopefully it goes through. Of course, it's going to give me 1,000 bugs because the playground's fun. But we'll just redeploy everything. I refresh the page, always refreshing the page. And if we go back to our transaction now and refresh the page again and send the transaction, boom, we don't get any error messages. It's now changed it to goodbye. So that's all cool. And I'm not going to show that in the script, but hopefully you trust me enough at this point. Okay, so that's all cool. Now, stuff gets a little more interesting. And remember, you can also add preconditions if you want to, right? You can add both. But stuff gets a little more interesting when we start saying, hey, we want this contract to actually have a resource. So what we can say is, let's say we want our contract to have a greeting resource. So public resource a greeting. And this is going to have, I don't know, let's just say a name in here. So we're going to say hi to somebody. Okay, so public var name, and this is going to be a string, just like this. So we're going to say, hey, we want the person implementing this contract to have a resource, and we want them to have a name inside of it. So let's deploy this contract. Let's go back to our first account, and let's refresh the page, and it's going to say, hey, doesn't conform. So we're going to add that resource here, public resource greeting. And we're going to add our cool name in here. So we're going to say, and look, see, it's still giving us this error because we haven't put the name here, public var name, string. And then, we've officially abided by the interface, but we have to actually initialize this because it's the actual contract now. Self.name equals, I don't know, Jacob, right? So we're all good. That's awesome. So we can deploy this contract and, there's no problems, right? So that's all good. Now, one thing that gets a little confusing to some people when they start looking at contract interfaces is sometimes in a contract interface, you'll see a resource interface, which is a little confusing. So let's say that we want to now have a public resource interface inside of our contract interface called iGreeting, right? And this is going to be a resource interface that our greeting resource abides by. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, but just stick with me for a second. So, obviously this isn't going to give any problems because our iGreeting, doesn't have anything in it. But let's say we added a public variable, I don't know, favorite food in here. I'm just thinking a lot about food right now. And so you'll notice that what's happening here is, you would think, as a smart Cadence developer, well, why isn't it complaining right now? This greeting resource abides by iGreeting. Why isn't it complaining? Because greeting doesn't have a favorite food. The thing is that in contract interfaces, for some reason, it doesn't complain like that. But we'll see that it will complain when we go back to our actual contract if we don't do this correctly. So we can redeploy the contract here. We can go to account 1. And what we can do is we can say, hey, we can refresh the page, and it says resource.greeting is missing a declaration to require conformance, blah, 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 right? And that's because it's saying, hey, we actually have to implement this resource interface here. So here's the trick. Inside of here, we don't just say iGreeting, right? Because iGreeting doesn't exist in this context. iGreeting exists in this interface. So what we actually have to say is iHelloWorld.iGreeting. because iGreeting exists in the contract interface, not here. And some of you may be saying, well, why don't we just say iGreeting and then just implement our own iGreeting in this one? Can't we do that? Can't we just implement like our own iGreeting here? And the answer is no, you can't do that. When this contract interface says this resource must abide by this resource interface, it's talking to this specific one in this contract. So we can't even define our own thing here. We have to explicitly say hello world.iGreeting. And so now it's going to complain, like I said, where we actually have to add our favorite food here. Or else, you know, it's going to give us an error that we're not doing the interface. So favorite food equals, I don't know, I'll just put pasta because I'm really boring. But that's not actually my favorite food, by the way. I just said that because I'm in the heat of the moment, and when I'm recording a video, it's hard to be creative. But you get the point. Okay, so that, you know, again, you know, it's not going to complain in here that we didn't do favorite food in this one, but it will in this one. So we have to make sure of that. Okay, so you know, then we could deploy this contract, and then we're all good. So that's sort of contract interfaces in a nutshell. Now, if you're bored of me talking and you get the point, you can leave this video. That's totally fine. So I know it's going over, so you can leave this video. But what I want to show you is an actual representation of a contract interface. That's actually really important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, this is the non-fungible token standard. So on Flow, every non-fungible token must use this contract interface. And so I'm going to copy and paste this interface. I'll also put the link in the description and put it into this contract 04 right here. So this interface, what you're looking at right now, is a contract interface by the Flow team. So this means that if you want to have a legitimate NFT on the Flow blockchain, your NFT contract must implement this non-fungible token contract interface. So as an example, we're going to get this example NFT here, and we're going to copy and paste this, and we're going to bring this back to the Flow playground. And so it's going to complain because the import's messed up, but and let's just replace this so that we don't see any errors really quick. Okay, so what's happening here is, in the same way that, you know, this was our actual contract and this was our contract interface, this is our actual NFT contract that we're calling example NFT. And this is the contract interface for that non-fungible token. So again, if we want to make our own NFT, for example, example NFT, and we want it to be a legitimate NFT on the Flow blockchain, it has to implement this non-fungible token standard. So let's actually take a quick look at the non-fungible token standard. You can see this is a contract interface. It says, hey, every NFT contract must have a total supply. It must have this event. It must have this event, this event. Now, remember, we don't have to define resource interfaces in our contract, right? So if we were to go into our actual contract, nowhere in this will you find INFT, right? There's no public resource INFT here. However, our non-fungible token resource inside our example NFT has to implement non-fungible token.inft. And that's the exact same thing I showed you before, where our greeting is iHelloWorld.iGreeting. This is non-fungible token, which is the contract interface.inft. And that's all defined in here, right? So that's defined right here, where the NFT must abide by the INFT interface. Now, there's some other stuff here, right? There's a provider interface, there's a receiver interface, there's a collection public interface, and then they define a collection in which it has to implement those three interfaces. And so if we were to go back to our contract and scroll down a bit, you'll see, hey, we have a collection that implements non-fungible token.provider, receiver, and collection public just as we expect. Now, the last thing I want to show you where stuff gets a little tricky is inside of here, if we were to scroll down, this is the contract interface again, and we were to go to the collection, you'll see that it's saying that, hey, every NFT contract must have an owned NFTs field that maps a UN64 to an NFT. Now remember, this NFT is talking about the NFT in this context. So it's talking about the NFT that's defined here in this interface, right? So you'll notice it's an owned NFT, it's mapping to an NFT. It's saying, hey, we want a withdraw function that takes in a UN64 and returns an NFT in this context, and all the rest, right? So if we go to our actual contract and go to our collection, you'll notice that it's mapping a UN64 to a non-fungible token.nft. And that's again because in the interface, it was mapping the NFT in that context. And so now that we're in the actual contract, we need to say non-fungible token at NFT, which is referring to the one in the interface. And you'll see that for the withdraw, you'll see that for deposit, and a bunch of them, do that. So if you got confused by that, that's why. So I just wanted to show you an actual example. I know this video went over. Hopefully you're not bored of me. And yeah, so that's all I wanted to show you. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. I can't find the stop record button. Found it.